Am I audible, everyone? All right, please turn on your cameras. How are you, Hardik? हुई इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ कुछ कल से लेके अभी तक इंडिया में? सोचा तुमने उस बारे में? कुछ पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू चेंज हुआ? ओके. All right. Any doubt from the previous class? Any doubt from the previous class? Anyone? Danish, turn on your camera. Trisha, Palguna. All right. हाँ.
सेल्फ जो प्रेशर ग्रुप्स हैं वो भी सर अपने ही इंटरेस्ट को पूरा कर रहे हैं सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप की तरह.
हाँ.
तो क्या डिफरेंस हुआ फिर?
सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप तो आज हम करेंगे. सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप में क्या होता है कि पहली बात तो देखो, जो प्रेशर ग्रुप का स्केल होता है वो बहुत वाइड होता है. सो प्रेशर ग्रुप्स, यू कैन हैव प्रेशर ग्रुप्स विच कैन हैव लाइक लैक्स ऑफ पीपल, बट सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स आर जनरली लिमिटेड टू टेंस और मे बी हंड्रेड्स ऑफ पीपल, नॉट बियॉन्ड दैट. Because the primary requirement for self-help group is just not voluntary contribution in terms of willing participation for a cause. It is also linked to a minimum financial contribution as well. So जब पैसा देना कोई बंद कर देगा तो वो उसका मेंबर नहीं रहता. So SHGs are mainly for financial empowerment, not for any particular policy driven cause. Yeah. All right. So let's start with the next topic that is displayed on your screen. Is the screen shared? Can you see the screen? Yeah. Okay. So as the name suggests, non-governmental organizations, NGOs. When you hear this name for the first time, you're likely to believe that any entity that is disconnected with the state or especially the government, here you can use both of them interchangeably, government and the state, is likely to be recognized as an NGO. But that is not an incorrect understanding of NGOs. However, the typology or the nomenclature has emerged from the same thought process. But when we take the name of NGOs in GS paper 2 or for any policy framework or polity subject, NGOs denote a very, very specific kind of civic society organizations. For example, if NGO just means a group of people disconnected from the state, then pressure group could also be an NGO, and then self-help group could also be an NGO, and then donors and charities could also be an NGO. So NGOs, while the name suggests that anything that could be disconnected from the government is likely or liable to be mistaken as an NGO, it is not the case. So first let's understand what an NGO is, and then let's understand how it could be differentiated from other civic society organizations, right? So for example, an NGO is a non-profit organization that functions in the domain of civic society. It is way more professional, well-organized set of people with working in the development industry. So for example, we have seen that development is a process, and all the civic society organizations situate themselves somewhere in that process, and they utilize the process as an industry. So while an entrepreneur utilizes economic process as an industry, the civic society organization use the development process as an industry, and they try to locate themselves somewhere to try to solve one or more than one problem that the society faces to induce their understanding of development, which is generally different from economic development, which could be social development, which could be socio-economic development, which could be human development, sustainable development, and n number of interpretations of the same word development. Now, when you look at a group of people, socially driven, ready to contribute voluntarily, generally without any remuneration or something like that, the first thing that I want to explain, just because we have done pressure groups yesterday, let's try to differentiate, because that is the only way we can understand NGOs better. So let's try to understand as to how they could be differently understood from a pressure group. We have done pressure group yesterday. They were also the group of people. They were also working in the development industry. And it looks like we have this almost the same understanding for NGOs as well. But when you try to go deeper into the understanding of NGOs and pressure groups, you'll realize that while both of them are trying to achieve social change, one of the group is trying to achieve the social change which they are directly impacted with or they are directly concerned with. So for example, all the members of the farmers union, all the members of labor union as a pressure group are directly involved in activism, the results of which directly impact them. So they are the stakeholders. So the members of, this is the basic underlying definition or differentiation between a group of people identifying themselves as an NGO and a group of people identifying themselves as a pressure or interest group. All the people involved in or for a pressure group, they themselves are direct stakeholders of the social change that they want to induce. So when a group of people lobby for a particular cause, they lobby for themselves. Unlike an NGO where urban youth goes to a rural area to educate people, which has no direct consequence on them or their family. Where a group of well-read, learned people go to rural areas to advocate for indigenous right cause, they are neither the stakeholders, and most likely any kind of dividend from their activism is not going to impact their lifestyle or their lives. So you can see that is the key differentiator between the interest group and an NGO, where the stakeholders are the direct participants are also the beneficiary or impacted party. Unlike an NGO, where there is no such, it could be true, but it is, in most cases, it is not true. Apart from that, the pressure groups and NGOs, while they might operate in the same field, for example, there could be pressure groups operating for environmental degradation to protect the environment, and there could be NGOs at the same time working in the field of environment. So their fields might overlap. So you have almost the same area where pressure groups are also operating, NGOs are also operating. But if you look at the operation of the pressure groups that we discussed yesterday, the operation of the pressure group mainly is limited to pressure tactics to induce some kind of policy change. And that is where NGOs take lead, because NGOs in their operation, they are not limited to just lobbying. They are just not limited to agitation. In fact, to the extent that the modern NGOs more operate in corporate style, the modern NGOs, unlike the modern pressure groups, have become so diversified that they increasingly resemble a small state-like apparatus. So NGOs are collecting data from the ground. NGOs are articulating policies for the government. NGOs have become the facilitator of development schemes and policies. You will never find a pressure group actually taking charge of some welfare scheme for the government or helping the government reach the last mile. But NGOs, when they operate, they have become so specialized and professional that they are almost, when you look at the state and an individual, probably if there are 100 fields where state has to interact with an individual, you will find an NGO situated in between somewhere. So for example, when state wants to deliver food, it is very difficult without Akshay Patra. Ideally, a powerful state should be able to deliver the food to all the people or all the intended beneficiaries, but that is increasingly difficult because of the limited capability of the state, or maybe because of better specialization of Akshay Patra to be able to distribute a healthy, nutritious food to all the school-going kids in our country. That is not the case with pressure groups. So whenever you will look at the pressure groups are situated very close to the state. When they form the association to lobby, they will lobby at party headquarters because they are the primary location of power. They situate themselves very close to the bureaucracy because that is where the policies are being drafted. They situate themselves very close to the state and its powerful institution. They identify the powerful institution and they surround that institution by themselves. Whereas if you look at the NGOs, NGOs could be located from anywhere from here to there. So this is the primary area of operation of pressure groups, whereas NGOs are versatile. They could be located anywhere from right in direct contact with the individual to right in direct contact with the state. Does that make sense to everyone? So you can see that they, unlike the pressure groups, you have as a functioning tool for their social change, they have a way more diversified function, starting from data collection to policy formulation to delivery of services to keeping the government accountable. Now, when you want to keep the government accountable, there are various measures using the tool of RTI, right to deny information. Then you can, accountability can be about interacting, lobbying with the MPs to ask questions, which is futile. But then you have ADR, Association for Democratic Reforms, or PUCL versus Union of India, who would go to any extent from high courts to Supreme Courts to tribunals to hold the government accountable. So litigation. Does that make sense to everyone? So you can see that this is what largely differentiates a pressure group, apart from finally the main formal designation that in order to be recognized as an NGO, you have to be registered as an NGO. But I don't think that is a definition which makes sense. Just me saying it is registered and what is not registered. There is really a difference between how they organize themselves and in what ways you can see they operate, and what is the modus operandi of the different kinds of civic society organizations. Does that make sense? Now, any doubts so far? Shreya, you have a doubt? Okay. All right. Now, when also one of the facts or one of the preconceived notions that we have, I have seen generally when I teach this topic, is that people come with this notion that these NGOs, sort of, these are very new entities. So they are a gift of modernity, or maybe, if not modernity, the gift of the Constitution of India. Only when you have Article 19 that you can have these kinds of activism in the civic space. But that is not the reality. All of us have gone through modern India. And now, after having gone through social religious reforms, I don't think I need to explain as to when NGOs started in our country. So for example, if you have MC Mehta as a modern environmental epitome of environmental activism, you have feminist activism in the form of Ishwar Chand Vidyasagar 200 years ago. You have Derozio as the liberal activator in our country way before India thought about fundamental rights. And now if you want to extrapolate it backwards, you can see that even in medieval India, from south to north, we had civic society, and we have a very thriving civic society. So starting from Nainars and Alwars in South India, basically sort of kick-starting the Bhakti movement, a different kind of devotional spiritualism, going up to all the saints that you can trace and ending up at Mirabai and all of these. If you look at them in one form, they can be understood as reinterpreting their basic religion that they used to follow. But if you look at it from the point of civic society, it was an activism to get some social change induced in their contemporary times. It was all an effort. So if you look at Narayan Guru, or if you look at Jyotiba Phule, how will you place today's Jyotiba Phule? You will place Jyotiba Phule in NGO driven by the cause of caste deprivation and women empowerment. Now, one thing for sure is that we did not have a regulatory mechanism to basically tag them with a particular designation, but they are, if they existed in modern contemporary times, we would call them Kailash Satyarthi, eligible for Nobel Prize. Right, so you can see that the civic society activism has always existed in our country, and it is just a false belief, or it is a false consciousness to believe that this has been derived from the West. So this sort of non-state, non-privately driven activism is a gift of Western society to us, is a false belief. We can understand democracy could be a gift of modern Western countries. There can be a debate about it, but there cannot be a debate about. So you can see that the civic society activism, in the form of an engagement where the people who are engaged are not seeking any direct benefit on themselves, like all the previous reformers that we have talked about. When you go for women empowerment, there is no benefit directly that you derive, correct? So that is why they were not pressure groups, they were NGOs in British times, or maybe in medieval times, or maybe in ancient times. So you can see that India has a long history of socio cultural, religious reformers, and from talking about when it is about social change, development industry, and they utilize the process as an industry, you can see that we had people fighting for the cause of caste, you had people fighting for the religion and religious reforms, and then you already had feminists in our country even before sort of feminism became vogue political ideology in vogue. So but as far as our length and breadth is concerned, we have to trace it after 1950, because in GS paper 2, UPSC is not going to ask questions on these people as an NGO or pressure groups. So obviously you have to prepare them, but you have to prepare them in a way that you are able to write an answer in history, not in GS paper 2. Correct? Obviously 1950 is a benchmark year, because as we have seen that the Constitution of India is not a result of a revolution, and hence it is a revolutionary document to give rise to a social revolution. Correct? So we were not fortunate enough to go through a revolution. So we did not have the good fortune of rewriting the social order. We did not have the opportunity to raise everything on ground and erect a new order. So we could not have done through arms, and that is why Constitution of India had to be extremely armed document to give transformation of the society peacefully, democratically, and through a procedure laid down by the law. So if you look at the Constitution of India, as we have seen that, if you look at the Constitution of India in itself, is like giving an innuendo. It's like indicating to the people, please do activism. It is like enticing people to form association to help the Constitution of India achieve the values that are enshrined there, constitutional morality. So for instance, when you look at the difference between the social document, social morality, and constitutional document, constitutional morality, all the places where you can see the difference immediately paves the way for the activism in the form of NGO. So for example, when the Constitution says equality before the law and equal protection of the law, wherever you see inequality in society, in economics, in politics, there is a scope of NGO, where you could be politically empowered, and in fact you are expected to be politically empowered, only then you can form an NGO generally. Look at the nationalist movement, again go back. All the people who led the nationalist movement were fortunate enough to be born and brought up in relatively decent families of those times. That's what initiated the nationalist movement. So you can see that the Constitution of India, just one second. हेलो, हाँ क्लास में हूँ भाई. हाँ मैं फ्री हूँ, 10 बजे के बाद फ्री हूँ. नहीं वो कैंसिल कर दूंगा मैं, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. ओके हाँ 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 ठीक है. And so you can see that initial while just like development, all these words are also very subjective to the interpretation of the people, but you can have any interpretation. None of the interpretation were available in our country. So even if you go by formal equality, that was still, and that continues to be a distant dream. So there is a lot of scope of activism there also. If you talk about liberty, the society did not provide liberty mainly because of the economic inequality and caste inequalities. And so forget about justice, which itself is the most vague and least understood concept. And that is why the first official form of civic society action in our country began in the fields of equality, liberty, and justice. Mainly, they deal with, so initial civic activism in the form of NGOs in our country were around basic civil and political rights. Because it was understood that political equality translates into all forms of equality, and it translates into all form of justice. But you will see that if you look at the number of NGOs registered, or number of civic societies, or number of societies and trusts registered as NGOs in the immediate first or second decade of the Constitution of India, was dismally low. As if the Indian society was, or it became a utopian society after 1950. After all, only in a utopian society you will not have civic society, correct? So you can see that when you go to the literature, you don't find much activism. And the reason, if you think about it for 2 minutes, is very simple. India's nationalist movement was itself a coalition of multiple NGOs, pressure groups. Now, if these NGOs and pressure groups, for example, India's nationalist movement was of course a political movement to gain independent sovereignty, but underlying it was a social coalition, was a coalition of multiple pressure groups and NGOs. So when farmers get associated, they associated themselves as a pressure group. When the most prominent women associated with the nationalist movement after the Gandhian phase, you see that you have the most empowered women who were also at the same time were in charge of some NGO to cater to or for gender empowerment. When you had nationalists on board who were also the editors and owners of the most prominent press journalism in our country, you can see that the nationalist movement was also the platform for the defense of liberty. So you can see underlying the nationalist movement, you had summation of so many social causes. And that is why you don't see civic liberty movement, because the entire civic society became the part of the state. अब इमेजिन करो अरविंद केजरीवाल चीफ मिनिस्टर बन जाए तो क्या होगा? So, when the civic society becomes the state authority, people always have faith that, okay, these are the people who fought for our liberties. Then they fought for the nationalism. These are the people who said that, okay, farmers will have to pay no rent. Now, farmers' tenancy would be protected. We will regularize the tenancy, and if we are landless, we would be redistributed the land. So, if I belong to an active farmer association which supported the nationalist movement, as soon as I see Patel and Nehru in charge, is there any need for me to worry about? Why would I worry if the leader of Kisan Sabha himself has become the prime minister? And if I am concerned about civic liberties, freedom of speech and expression, I can see the Constitution of India giving me guarantees, and then I can see Nehru as the prime minister in charge at the helm, who himself was looked as a person who was very democratic in his outlook and pluralistic in his thought process. So there is no need for me to worry about anything until we realize how they operated as a part of the state, which took the people of our country 20 years to realize कि ये तो हमारे साथ स्कैम हो गया. इसीलिए स्टेट और सिविक एक्शन हमेशा decoupled होना चाहिए. Because when you operate as a part of the state, you operate with a lot of terms and conditions that you lose the flexibility that is needed for a civic society action. And that is why you can see the first prominent civic society movement in the form of NGOs emerging at the peak of emergency. Only when you suppress people that you force them to unite. So if you go and check People's Union for Civic Liberty, it was formed in 1975. If you see Association for Democratic Reforms, all, so you can see at the peak of emergency, which was the lowest point of the rights in our country, that you have suddenly mushrooming of NGOs. And which kind of mushrooming? Mainly focused on liberty, democracy. Does that make sense to everyone? So you can see that the rise of rights advocacy is rooted in emergency. From the time of independence until the emergency, there were some but not noteworthy civic society action in the form of NGO. Is this clear? So you have various NGOs which targeted and made it a resolve that what kind of social change that we look for is to prevent any downgrade of liberty. So you can see that is also a development process. So it's just not about inducing some positive change, it's also taking a resolve to prevent any negative change in the society as well. That is also equally important. So you can see that the resolve of these NGOs was never to allow emergency like situation to repeat in our country. And they realized that lack of awareness about constitution, lack of knowledge about various judicial and constitutional procedures has created this kind of situation where we were literally devoid, like a colonial state, we were devoid of any kind of guarantees in the constitution. At the same time, while this was going on mainly in the arena of civic liberty, you have to understand that you can activate, you can do a lot of civic society initiative, you can take the initiatives only as long as first, in most cases, that right is directly recognized by the state or looks like can become available. So for example, if a dream or if a target or if a social change that you want to target is too distant, then also civic society action is difficult. If you think that this can be done by lobbying, if you think some change can be induced through activism, through dharna, through protest, through data collection, through writing articles, then you will talk about it. You cannot be too much drastic in your demand. Because the Constitution of India directly gave you some fundamental rights in form of minimum civic liberty guarantees, it was easier for these kinds of institutions to form because they were extremely legitimate. Their demands were extremely legitimate. No one could have questioned. They could just immediately show the Constitution of India, look, this is what Article 19 says, this is what Article 21 says, this is what Article 14 says. So we are exactly talking about that. So the initial NGOs were mainly around poverty, were around civic liberties, freedom of speech and expression, life, personal liberty, until the point when immediately after emergency, judiciary decides to widen the horizon of fundamental right. And now you can understand, we all have gone through it. Every new judgment interpreting a new fundamental right out of Article 21 paves the way for an entire new spectrum of civic society activism. Because now you are like, Supreme Court has said that deprivation of shelter and livelihood without a procedure established by law, that has to be just, fair and reasonable. will be struck down. Now, if there are 5 people and they read the judgment and then they immediately see that there is a colony that is being bulldozed, they try to find out whether there is a law that lays down the procedure for such bulldozer action. If they see there is none, out of 5 people, probably 1 would be moved by this violation of someone else's rights. Immediately followed by Supreme Court judgment that you don't have to prove your locus standi to represent a particular cause. You immediately utilize the litigation, the judicial activism, the litigation process, and once you win the case, it gives you recognition, it gives you funding, it gives you credibility, and then you have the confidence to adopt this as a career. कि हाँ ये ठीक चीज है. And so, wider the horizon of Article 21, Article 19, Article 14 gets, wider will be the platform for civic society engagement in the form of NGOs. And that's when you have NGOs working in the field of environment conservation. Because not until the point when it was said that right to clean environment or deprivation of right to clean environment could be a violation of Article 21, it was such a distant social change that you could not have thought about it. But as soon as Supreme Court articulates this, clearly lays this down in a Supreme Court judgment, then you have the confidence to open an NGO because you have the Supreme Court's judgment as the backing. When judiciary realized this, that they are supported by the civic society, they understood that in order to extend their control over executive and legislature, they can be extremely good friends. So you can see that after 1980s, a strong coalition was formed between NGOs on one hand, judiciary on the other. They both enticed each other into action, reducing gradually, cutting down the power of executive to a great extent. After all, remember, who can become an MP, an MLA, and who cannot become an MP, an MLA, and through what process you can become an MP, MLA is determined by the Constitution of India, the Representation of the People's Act, and Supreme Court judgments. And that all of the Supreme Court judgments are the litigations filed by NGOs. Public Interest Foundation, People's Union for Civic Liberty, Association for Democratic Reforms. Does that make sense? Any doubt? मयूक, हो गया तेरा खाना? Palguna?
I would understand that the first step of activism that would happen was there has to be a proper law. In order to bring about that change in that law, to what extent does the NGOs and pressure groups influence the judiciary itself?
Influence the judiciary?
Because we don't
There's a direct alliance between civic society, NGOs, and judiciary. There is a direct alliance, means a strong and a direct coalition between the two. It's like on a Friday night over a party, the top NGOs meet with the Chief Justice of India and then they decide कि सर इस वीक ये वाला कर देना है. अब कैसे होगा ये आप देखो.
So pressure groups lobby at party headquarters and in the judiciary chambers.
They would lobby at party headquarters. So see, NGOs do not. So pressure groups lobby NGOs. We are discussing NGOs right now. Yeah. So you can see that NGOs transition from mainly focusing on civic liberties to now covering all the domains that could be precisely written as human rights. There is a difference between first generation rights, mainly focused on life, liberty, and property. And then, if the as soon as so we remember the initial discussion on rights, as the state and society evolve, then the understanding of rights also change. So here in India, the state really did not, or the society did not evolve, but because of judicial activism, these rights were brought before they could be positively provided by the state. So sort of they were enforced by one organ of the state onto other organs. Is this making sense to everyone? Now, as the time evolved, so you can see that is why most number of human rights, so for example, starting from Olga Tellis, livelihood, Bandhua Mukti Morcha, and NGO. So now go back to all those Article 21 discussions and you will see all of them are NGOs. MC Mehta has an NGO. So Child Rights, Kailash Satyarthi operates Bachpan Bachao Andolan, an NGO. So you can see that the widening of the horizon of FR has happened because of judicial activism facilitated by the civic society action in the form of NGOs. So from civic liberty to human rights, and now you have, so for example, at the forefront, you have environment, climate change, NGOs. You have active NGOs in the form of education that could not have happened had first Supreme Court not read right to education as a part of fundamental rights, and later on through constitutional amendment we would not have added Article 21. So you have an NGO like Pratham, which mainly focuses on data gathering and advocacy and trying to raise awareness about the dismal state of education in our country through its reports, ASAR. Correct? So you can see that in terms of education, then the health, then you have LGBTQ. Now, how was this possible? Johar Foundation. Johar Foundation was possible. A group of people who want to protect the rights of LGBTQI community, until you had a Delhi High Court judgment which decriminalized homosexuality under Article 377 back in 2010, which was then overruled by the Supreme Court, then again overruled by. Had it not been for the retired Justice K.S. Puttaswamy and his civic society activism, privacy. And now, privacy itself has opened up so many domains of civil society action. Is this clear to everyone? So you can see the point of this discussion is to communicate as to how the grounds on which NGOs can operate has widened drastically over time. So starting from a very narrow domain to a little bit wider domain to much wider domain, that you have civil society activism possible in our country. Aritro?
So given that the judiciary is in an activist mode since the emergency, doesn't that mean that many of the NGOs should go redundant?
Should?
They should go redundant because the judiciary has already replaced many of their functions.
No, judiciary cannot operate without a fully functioning NGO. They have a synergistic relation, just like corals cannot operate without zooxanthellae. NGOs can't operate, judiciary cannot operate without. They give us, it's like a mutualistic, it's a symbiotic relation. अरे तू म्यूट है मारुत्रो, तो म्यूट आचे. अच्छा उतना अच्छा, मैं भूल गया हूँ बहुत सारी चीजें. ओके, सो let's take some examples of NGOs that operate in different fields. The subcategorization of NGOs can be on different basis. So for example, NGOs can be segregated into international NGOs and national NGOs, or transnational NGOs, multinational NGOs, and Indian NGOs, which means Amir and Garib NGOs. So as simple as that. So fully funded often referred pejoratively, derogatorily by ruling parties in India as five-star NGOs. These are the people who operate in an extremely corporate fashion. So they have professionals hired from management schools. They are so vast in their operation that they need MBA people for their operation. So these are international NGOs, like Amnesty International is one of them. Right. So that can be one of the basis on which you can differentiate territory, operational territory. So on the basis of that, you can have international NGOs and you can have national NGOs. You can differentiate them from the main area, according to the main area of their operation or activism. For instance, child-based NGO, environment-based NGOs. So the main social change, or what is the focus of your social change, can lead to another distinction, focus of social change. So depending upon the concern, the main concern that you are trying to operate can lead to another distinction. So some NGOs focus on women empowerment, some NGOs focus on environmental degradation, some NGOs focus on health or education, and in that way. Another kind of distinction can be on the basis of the mode of or the procedure followed to achieve the social change. So while you could focus on child empowerment or child protection, but there are various ways to reach at the same goal. There are various means which enable you to reach almost the same goal. The fact that no one knew Kailash Satyarthi, but everyone knew child rights and you, shows that they operated in different fields. Until he got the Nobel Prize, no one had any idea about Bachpan Bachao. But all of us probably had seen CRY somewhere, because their functioning, one mode of functioning gives them limelight, the other NGO's functioning is deprived of limelight. One is into direct action, that if there is a call, that there is a child in the need of protection of law, that there is a child who is abandoned or maybe lost his family or maybe has been abducted, kidnapped, then immediately Bachpan Bachao Andolan people will go there and make sure that the child reaches his home. Direct action on the ground. Whereas child rights in you operates more in the domain of creating awareness through publications, through advertisements about the child rights. So their target is the same, but the way they operate is different. Right? So you can see that NGOs can be differentiated through the mode in which they function. So you can see that here you can have various distinctions. Some NGOs mainly focus on litigation, and they generally would be the group of lawyers, for example, who are empathetic or who can be compassionate for a particular cause. And obviously you can see that there is no finance required if you yourself are a group of 4 good friends and a lawyer, and you also share a common social change. So you can just file a PIL at any instance of time you want. So this is the least cost and most effective strategy as a lawyer. So litigation is one of the fields. Agitation is another field where you mainly operate through association and assemblies, mainly to disrupt for a very short span of time public order, to draw the attention of local administration, government, to draw the attention to a particular cause. Then you can mainly focus on awareness creation through, as we have seen, publications, research, editorials, all things, advertisements. So you must have seen various advertisements paid advertisements by the NGOs talking about different social things. It's not like advertisements are always profit driven. A lot of advertisements are non-profit driven advertisements as well. And this is what we understood in Article 19, that while you can say that advertisements are in gray zone where they are not completely protected as non-advertisement, the only kind of advertisements that get the full protection of Article 19 are those advertisements which are in the form of non-profit, which want to spread awareness about some public concern. They get the full protection. They have the full expression freedom. Is this clear to everyone? Yeah. So you can have agitators. At the same time, you can have NGOs which can believe in service delivery. Now, service delivery, because they themselves are well funded, so they can buy or purchase a good or a service and they can provide that to people. If they themselves are not well funded, they can crowd fund for a particular cause. And also, these are the NGOs which then get attached to the state in some area of their choice to reach out to individual, to extend, to help the state or enable the state to target the beneficiary in the most effective fashion. So they, in that sense, they become facilitator for the state as well, despite being non-governmental organization. So service delivery is facilitator. Is this clear to everyone? Okay. Any doubt so far? ऐसा कैसे हो सकता है कोई डाउट नहीं हो? Yes. Okay. So I have included all those examples here in the notes, so you don't have to worry about them, whatever we have discussed. Please try to make sure that you memorize all these examples exactly. So you would get, so it is important for you to memorize all these examples with the latest edition. You have to remember at least 20 NGOs examples. Depending upon the mains question, you could be required to, choose any 5 out of 20 examples. Mayuk?
Yes, sir. Sir, I joined in a little bit. Sorry, sir, if I missed something. Sir, my question was, sir, again, yesterday what I asked. Do you keep a check on the NGOs, sir? The activities of these NGOs, especially the international NGOs, sir, that operate in India. However, sir, some NGO comes in and says that we want to speak for the cause of the Kashmiris. So would the government of India allow it?
What do you think? If you are Joint Secretary in Ministry of Home Affairs, responsible for FCRA, Foreign Contribution Regulation, and let's say there's like 8 crore rupee transferred into a particular NGO which operates in Kashmir. Is there any Kashmiri in the house? Let's put them one on one. No Kashmiri? Okay, Mayuk, हाँ बताओ. अच्छा, मान लो वो एनजीओ फ्लैग होइस्टिंग फंड करता है इंडियन ट्राई कलर की हर जगह, तो फिर तो तुम्हारा सस्पेंशन नहीं हो जाएगा तुरंत? So what I'm saying is that, of course, we'll discuss these are the challenges and these are the concerns that the NGOs face, and as we'll see that whenever the concerns for internal security go high, the protection for civic liberties go low, because ultimately you have only one constitutional guarantee, that is freedom of speech and expression. Now, freedom of speech and expression is reasonably restricted on concerns for sovereignty and integrity, security of India, friendly relation with foreign country, public relation, public interest, public order. Now, if forget about NGO, if even a YouTuber operates in that area, that YouTuber is in jail. So you can see that you are not allowed to operate in an area which has the consequence of compromising with sovereignty and integrity for our country. So obviously that should be banned, and obviously no funding should be allowed. There is no discussion about that.
Right, sir. So that is the biggest expression. It's already a sensitive area, sir. And so what about the other NGOs that operate in the rest of the country, where they are restricted to this? So,
Mayuk, I'll tell you that NGOs are less used for anti-state funding. NGOs are more used for money laundering. So if you are concerned about the operation of NGOs, you should be more concerned about tax evasion. And you cannot deny, and you cannot compare which one of them is more severe threat to India's integrity and security. So this focus on it being used in Kashmir for anti-state India activity actually shifts the focus from actually where it should be, and it should be on the misuse of NGOs to launder the money, to give it. एक तरफ से आलू डालते हो आप, उधर से सोना निकल जाता है. तो राहुल गांधी वाज प्रॉब्ली डिनोटिंग टू पॉलिटिकल पार्टीज एंड एनजीओस. आप ब्लैक मनी डालो, व्हाइट निकलेगा उधर से एकदम. This is how political parties operate. This is how NGOs operate. Correct? So that should be the larger concern. Aritro?
So you were giving historical examples about how NGOs are not equal in India.
Correct.
Thinking of the temple entry movements of southern India or
Yeah.
institutions like the Nair Service Society.
Right.
Can these be called NGOs or pressure groups?
Now, it will depend upon how they identify themselves. So you're talking about temple entry. So obviously temple entry would be more like a pressure group, because generally, I mean, it will depend upon specific case to case. It could be pressure group, it could be NGO, but generally in most cases, temple entry movement. So for example, Periyar himself came from upper caste. So in that kind of definition, it would not be a pressure group, it would be an NGO, because he was not seeking an entry himself. For himself, he already had an entry. Correct. So for a person who has an entry to enable what? Yeah, correct. But it is more than that. Apart from intended benefit, it's not just about one person, it's about all the people. All the people in pressure group are the beneficiaries. So all the farmers in farmers union themselves are associated with a single cause and impacted by it at the same time. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So you can see that overall, if you have to analyze the operation of NGOs, obviously I don't think I need to repeat the points again. I mean, if it is about what NGOs have done for India, what NGOs have enabled us, NGOs have highlighted the most prominent social problems, political problems that India faces. So they highlight all the deficits in governance. So they keep the executive and the parliament accountable. Then they act as facilitators. They have enabled the widening of legal and fundamental rights that are available to us. Correct. They come just like the positives of all the civic society action is available with NGOs, but in high proportion. Correct. Because the people of NGO target other people's benefits, or ideally if they are working like that. So voluntary action, higher legitimacy, all of the positives that we understood yesterday, they are available with NGOs in high proportion, in high degree. So whenever you have to talk about the benefits of NGOs, go back to the first slide where we talked about why the civic society action is so powerful and what are the benefits that we yield. Do you remember the slide yesterday, right? Where we discussed the voluntary action, higher legitimacy, responsiveness, from bottom to top approach, all of that also adds on to NGOs. So we are not going to discuss that. Let's now discuss the problems that NGOs face or challenges that NGOs face, especially in Indian context. Now, the challenges that NGOs face or the issues that NGOs face, one of them is the concerns regarding the overall operation of NGOs. Like, the reason is located within themselves because of their operation. As Mayuk said, that is not the challenge that they face. The concern, the reasons because of which we are concerned about in general civic society, but particularly NGOs, because of their power. And then, as a result of that, what are the challenges that they face? So the concerns, while there are a lot of good benefits, completely you can see it is demonstrable, it is extremely objective, you can see it that these are the changes that you yourself have yielded, positive benefits have been yielded by all of us in this meeting as a result of that. But at the same time, there are massive concerns with respect to the operation of NGOs. Is this making sense to everyone? Number one is, year on year, you can see that the area of operation of NGOs has shifted to those arenas where the NGO activism directly conflicts with our understanding of growth and development. So what the state is now feeling is that they are inhibitors of growth in our country. So when you want to, let's say, construct a highway, then there would be an NGO कि नहीं ऐसे कैसे जमीन ले ली हमारी. You go to that area and one day the district magistrate and SP go and they, all the villagers agree कि हाँ सर कल आप आना, बस 4 करोड़ रुपए रखो, जमीन ले जाओ. और फिर कल क्या हुआ, बैठ गए धरने पे, अरे आपने कल बोला था कि आप जमीन दे दोगे. एंड देन यू रियलाइज देयर आर 2 people who do not look like villagers. And then when the local intelligence unit try to find about their details, it turns out they work for an NGO. They were absent the day when all the villagers agreed to the compensation, and the next day they just say ki, now you can understand the frustration of the government. The two socio-economic goals conflict with each other. The just and right fair compensation and the government's or the state's promise to develop the infrastructure are colliding with each other. The government of India, in order to increase its self-independence in imports, identifies a rare earth element. Obviously, it can never be located in your backyard. It is always located in forested areas where no one lives. No one lives means no one who matters to us lives. And so when the government goes for the allocation of the forested land under the Forest Conservation Act 1980, it is only the central government which can allow deforestation, even though it is not a central subject. Now, when the government issues the clearances, the government is expecting that वहाँ तो internet भी नहीं है, and in 10 days you see all the tribals collecting at the district headquarter protesting कि ये notification कैसे आया. And state administration asks, इसमें क्या लिखा है? Tribal कहता है मुझे नहीं पता, लेकिन ये आया कैसे? Because there was someone who read that, immediately printed it in 1,000 copies and took it and explained the English and Hindi text in their tribal language कि देखो ये होने वाला है तुम्हारे साथ. Now, the state's objectives are not completely, you can say, they're not devilish. Obviously, if we are dependent on China for our rare earth imports, obviously any new reserve of rare earth import and its mining is a justified state objective. You cannot deny that. But at the same time, you cannot deny that you are going to uproot, rehabilitate, resettle, maybe not properly, in violation of the indigenous rights there. From year on year, Ministry of Home Affairs, Economic Survey, and various other government documents like Niti Aayog reports have said that because of the active civil society led by NGO, India's economic growth is downgraded by at least 2 to 3%. मतलब वो पेपर पे 7% दिखाते हैं, फिर कहते हैं कि ये 10 होता अगर सिविक सोसाइटी नहीं होती तो. So you can see that they are, what are the concerns with regard to NGO is that they act as a, or they are seen as resistance to growth. Because people like Hardik become IAS officers, and obviously who believe that the only development that we should focus upon right now is economic growth. So any roadblock or any hindrance to that is obviously taken as the roadblock. So that creates a negative perception about NGOs. Hardik, सही कह रहा हूँ गलत कह रहा हूँ?
They compensate the fairly, sir. I mean, you also know कि government काफी अच्छा पैसे देती है.
हाँ.
तो फिर भी जैसे आपने बताया कि एक पॉज करके मुंह डाल दिया जाता है कि भाई आपकी जमीन हड़पनी जा रही है, आपको पैसे की भी.
देखो पैसा, बिल्कुल सही कह रहे हो तुम, लेकिन जब एक हाईवे जाता है ना, अब मैं इसमें ज़्यादा डिटेल में नहीं जाऊंगा, अभी एंड ऑफ डिस्कशन होगा. मान लो ये हाईवे का प्लान है, तो ऑब्वियसली ये प्लॉट्स होंगे, ये ऐसे ऐसे, इनको अक्वायर कर लिया तुमने. नहीं, क्या इशू बोल रहा हूँ मैं, सुनो एक बहुत सिंपल बात बताता हूँ. अगर ये हाईवे नहीं है तो यहाँ पे घर है, ये किसी का एक पूरा विलेज है, ठीक है, लोग यहाँ से बाइक उठाते हैं, पैदल चले जाते हैं. तुमने देखा है जब एक एक्सप्रेसवे बनता है तो इकोसिस्टम कैसे डिसरप्ट होता है. वो आदमी जिसके गांव के बीच में से रोड गई है, वो 4 किलोमीटर आगे जाएगा, अंडरपास से नीचे आएगा और फिर 5 किलोमीटर वापस आएगा अपने नेबर से मिलने के लिए या अपनी दुकान पे जाने के लिए, क्योंकि हमें अपनी गाड़ियां 100 से कम नहीं करनी, इसलिए कोई इंटरसेक्शन अलाउड नहीं है क्रॉसिंग. तो क्रॉसिंग या तो 20 किलोमीटर आगे या 10 किलोमीटर इधर है, क्योंकि हमारी गाड़ियां नहीं रुकनी चाहिए भाई, हमें तो पहुंचना है इलाहाबाद 8 घंटे में. इसके लिए हर एक विलेज जो इस रोड पे आता है उसकी लाइफ के आपने 2 साल ले लिए, क्योंकि वो हर ट्रैवल जो अपने खेत में 5 मिनट में करता था अब वो कर ही नहीं सकता, अगर उसका खेत अनफॉर्चुनेटली इधर है और उसका घर इधर है. इसकी क्या कॉस्ट है ना? नहीं कोई बात नहीं, इट्स अबाउट आउटलुक. यस सुमति. Right. 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 Yeah. That's that's true. That's not even a proper growth economically as well. So, but the problem is that some of the most crucial national projects, like for example Kudankulam, which was supposed to be, which is now it is coming up, atomic energy plant, or for example mining. These are the projects which are considered to be strategically important projects because they they create diversification of electricity supply, they make you less reliant on coal, so they are important for green energy as well at the same time. So you can see that the protest against these nationally important projects mainly creates this perception, not like everyday road and highway and transport, like, but that is also true that it adds on, it adds fuel to the fire that already exists. What adds more fuel to the fire is that many of the NGOs receive foreign funds. They just not receive foreign funds, they receive funds from state other than India, and they receive aid or direct help from the biggest corporates around the globe. So Once you earn a lot of money, capital, and then you become a philanthropist, and then you donate in that capacity. Now the question is, think about it. We started by saying that civic society has this flexibility, has this agility because it is disconnected from the state and the corporate, from the business private interest as well as the state interest. That's what adds the real essence of civic society action. Maybe they are disconnected from Indian state and Indian corporate, but they are entrenched in foreign corporate and foreign state. What gave them this ferocious nature was that there is no conflict of interest that gave them legitimacy. कि भाई इनका तो अपना कुछ हित ही नहीं है, लेकिन इंडिया में आप कनेक्टेड नहीं हो. अगर इफ यू आर कनेक्टेड आउटसाइड ऑफ इंडिया विथ डायरेक्टली विथ अ स्टेट और विथ अ कॉर्पोरेट, how do you claim that legitimacy of not being impacted by the conflict of interest of that foreign state and conflict of interest of that mega corporation? So a Ford Foundation funded project in India, an NGO funded, directly receiving funds from Ford Foundation, how do we not know that it has been donated or it has been fueled to prevent the Indian automobile industry from increasing its production to compete with the Western automobile companies? How do we know? If an NGO is present at a protest site, which is about the iron and steel manufacturing plant, how do we directly not know that it has been dictated by the headquarters in US to carry out this agitation? I mean, it might not be true, but allegations are not deprived or denied of credibility. There are some credibilities. Now, if you want to retain your truly civic society essence, you should deny funding from the mega corporates. You should deny funding from any foreign state. And then no one will have the ability to question your credibility. So as soon as you start receiving funds from the state and non-state privately driven ventures, obviously it gives more credibility to the state action. And when state comes after you, especially when you have participated in anti-government initiatives, even the judiciary is likely to distance themselves. कि भाई right to shelter तक तो ठीक था bro, अब ये ज़्यादा हो गया. Right? Judiciary will never going to entertain such causes which directly confront the government mega projects. At the same time, you are foreign funded or you are funded by the mega corporates across the globe. Also, the concern is that once you register yourself as an NGO, there are various ways that you can register yourself as an NGO. You can register, there are various options available. You can register as a society, you can register as a trust, or you can register as a non-for-profit company as well under the Companies Act 2013. There are multiple options depending upon your cause, your funding, you can choose, but generally the order is that this is the highest or the most closely regulated and this has the most loose regulation. But you can register them. It's just like when you have to initiate an entrepreneurship, you can register yourself as a limited liability LLP, limited liability partnership, sole proprietorship. You can register as a private limited company. All of them have different regulatory standards and all of them are subject to different checks and balances. The problem is that while there can be difference of the regulation among and within them, all of them are subject to the minimum regulation. But in India, there are so many NGOs. There are around more than lakhs of registered NGOs. There is no way that we can keep a track whether or not they are maintaining the standards. We can only keep the track of the most funded, well-funded, most well-known. We cannot go into every nook and corner to identify because they are not necessary for the purpose of income tax. So even the income tax department has no direct interest there. So while they are subject to the norms of regulatory subjection, financial reporting, auditing, the most important concern that has emerged and that has given the freedom or the leverage to the state to come back at them is that their documentation is improper, most of them. So while they expect at most accountability from executive, they themselves are not accountable. After all, they are friends with judiciary. So that has given them this kind of not being hypocritical. Also, as I said, that they are often associated with not so novel social change measures. Most of the NGOs in our country are definitely being run and maintained only to launder the money. And the easiest way to launder the money is to donate to an NGO. So your shown income becomes tax free, because whatever you donate to a political party or an NGO in our country is deductible from the taxable amount. So that exactly is taken out. The money that you give to an NGO then can be returned to you in various forms. For example, if you have 10 CR of extra money that you don't want to pay to the government, you donate it to the NGO. And then the same NGO can keep 1 crore as the transaction, as the charge, and then 9 crore rupees can be returned to you in form of taking care of your expenses and your family's expenses on NGO's budget. So something that should have gone to the government goes to the NGO, and then NGO purchases vehicles for you, maintains chauffeurs for you, maintains cooks. So if there are 20 people working at your own home, they are on the payroll of the NGO. So that is why the Companies Act 2013 had to be amended 3 years ago to put a cap that if NGO receive 100 rupees, they cannot spend more than 20% of it, because it was seen that they were receiving crores of rupees and everything was shown as an expenditure. Expenditure on their own. 80% should go to the social cause. But again, you know that the spending on social cause can also be manipulated. Is this clear to everyone? Also, there is a concern that most of the NGOs, while it initiated with voluntary, compassionate civic society action, we understand what compassion is, right? Empathy plus action. So you're just not कि अरे यार उसके साथ बहुत बुरा हो रहा है. You're like मैं कुछ करूँगा उसके लिए. So there is a difference between empathy and action. So when it combined, it gives you compassion. What we see is a transition in the most active NGOs in our country, that they more and more increasingly resemble the corporates. They operate like corporates. So for example, I did not include it here, but you will see in Mains QIP there is a screenshot where on LinkedIn on one day randomly I saw Helpage India seeks an MBA graduate and the condition was preferably from IIM. Now imagine an NGO who wants to hire a finance MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, Bangalore and Calcutta. And if that person eventually gets that job, obviously you can understand it must be a high package, it must be competitive as compared to the industry standards. Secondly, inclusion of that person in an NGO dilutes the whole character of the institution itself, which was supposed to be an association of people who are moved by a cause, whereas you are hiring a person who is not moved by, in most cases, that particular cause. That's why he decided to do an MBA. To be a part of either the self-entrepreneurship or to be a part of some corporate. So the person who aspires to become the part of the state or the private, you want to entice them into civic society action, creating a contradiction. So from voluntary, compassion-driven civic action, they are now transitioning into a professional, career oriented action. That you join NGO because they pay you well. So there's not much differentiation between like a joining Google India or Helpage India. भाई मैंने तो स्विच कर लिया, मैं तो अब हेल्पेज इंडिया में आ गया हूँ, गूगल छोड़ दिया मैंने. इट कैन हैपन इन 10 years लाइक दैट. इंस्टेड ऑफ पीपल सेइंग मैं तो अमेजॉन छोड़ के गूगल में आया हूँ, लोग कहेंगे कि मैं हेल्पेज छोड़ के CRY चला गया. तेरा क्या चल रहा है? मैं तो अभी बचपन बचाओ में हूँ. अरे यार कोई नहीं, अच्छा टाइम आएगा तेरा भी. मतलब हो सकता है ना कि जैसे कंपनीज और कॉर्पोरेट्स की हायरार्की है वैसे ही NGOs की हायरार्की हो. वी कैन सी दैट. सविता.
Sir, but this point, isn't it like a double-edged sword? Because on the one hand, NGOs working based on volunteerism and compassion are given to allegations of, as you said, improper documentation or maybe money laundering. But on the other hand, if they try to bring in standardization or a way in which the output that they produce is easily measurable, quantifiable, and the workings of the NGO are much more organized, then we say that they are somehow losing their roots.
Right. So that is what we are going to write in way forward. Now we need a proper platform. We need to create a uniform standards of registration. So why do we give them an option of registering themselves as trust, as societies, as companies, non-for-profit companies? We should not give them that option. We should create a portal. Just like we have a portal to file the income tax returns, we should have a portal for NGO like Darpan. It already exists, but it is also not, it is limited to some NGOs. We should create the mechanism that will obviously it will help silence the concerns that we have with regard to their functioning. True.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What you're saying is right. Also, just like we saw in pressure groups that there is a elite bias. In case of pressure group, the elite bias is a little bit more long lasting. So industries and the pressure group operating in industrial policy making, they were influential and they will continue to be influential. But at the same time, while FICCI was powerful, ASSOCHAM emerged because the service sector in India itself emerged in 1990s. Correct. Now, in case of NGO, the main mode of their operation fluctuates very quickly on the basis of donations. So, jidhar paisa, udhar activism. So, for example, before Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, most of the civic society activism was directed towards, you can see, as before, I'm talking about before 2003 and 4, it was mainly towards democracy and voting rights and RTI. So you can see RTI came into existence. And as soon as you have massive funding into primary education, you have massive funding into health, the public health and awareness, you have massive funding in HIV AIDS, you immediately see mushrooming of NGOs operating in that arena. Now, Bill Gates, I don't know, but after Bill Gates, whoever will be the biggest philanthropist. So it is very difficult to project the trajectory of NGO and rely on them as long-lasting partners of development. Side बदल लेंगे ये. You cannot also deny the practical reality that you need money for activism. So whoever will give the money will have the ability to influence the activism arena. Yeah, George Soros. I mean, that is just, I don't, yeah. So you can see that donor fueled operation or activism. So if you are about to get a funding of $1 million and you reach the last stage of funding, and then immediately it says there, but I would have funded you had you, if you were you operating in this area, we would have completely funded you, but I'm sorry. Immediately say, sir, hum karenge, ye bhi karenge. don't deny us the funding. As soon as I go back to India, I will float a new vertical, and definitely I can promise that this is something that we will start now. So you can see that now the Marx is always right. So let's not. So you can see that these are the problems that that the NGOs face, the challenges, the concerns. So what can be the way forward? I just noticed the time. So I mean, everything is there. Please go through these PPTs and try to memorize them. So what can be the way forward? You need a national regulatory agency. Savita, does this satisfies you? Is this a good recommendation? National accreditation agency, that every NGO before being registered should be registered by should be first accredited by a standard uniform agency, and then there should be a separate regulatory body, just like you have regulation of higher education in our country. So you have UGC for accreditation, and then you have NACC NAC for the regulation. So they are decoupled from each other. Similarly, you need a decoupled regulatory framework for the NGOs as well. Is this clear? NGOs that are implementing government schemes and policies have become subject to the RTI. Just recently Supreme Court judgment came, but just like political parties should ideally be under RTI, but they are not. So it still remains to be seen whether the judiciary will have the ability to force their friends to subject themselves to RTI. So something that remains to be seen. ये गलती हो गई जुडिशरी से, जो कि मुझे लगता है बहुत जल्दी करेक्ट हो जाएगी. The idea is that if you are a public authority, you are subject to RTI, which means you operate as a state entity. Now, all those NGOs which have become a part and parcel of any government operation, which frequently receive fund from Indian state, which are implementing. So for example, there are many states where the midday meal scheme is the complete responsibility solely of Akshay Patra. So there, Akshay Patra as an NGO has replaced the state. So state is absent there. So slowly and gradually, if the NGOs replace more and more area of operation of the state, should not they be subjected to the same regulations as the state is subjected to? And so that is why they should be subjected to RTI, especially those which are responsible for administration of schemes and policies. Then just like you expect the social auditing, which means the impact assessment, social impact assessment done by the beneficiary. So you know that lately CAG has engaged social audit. Most number of welfare schemes and their effectivity as to whether they help the intended beneficiary or not is judged by the beneficiaries themselves. So they vote, right? Like a feedback. So should we not have the NGOs feedback? Should we not take the feedback of Akshay Patra from the schools on the children who themselves are fed by them? So you can see that in terms of transparency, there needs to be a categorization based on funding source. One receiving even 1 rupee of foreign funding should be subjected to higher regulatory standards, and ones who are completely domestically funded, even by state or by domestic corporate, should be separately funded, and they should be mandated to put up their annual report on a Ministry of Home Affairs website. Now it's for the MHA to have the human resource to be able to go through and scrutinize all the reports. If MHA fails on that, that will be a failure on behalf of the state, not on NGO. But what would be mandatory is to file an annual report about the income, the expenses, and whatever you have achieved. So everything that we have talked about is written. Let's now cover donors and charities. Any doubts so far? Anyone? आओ हार्दिक.
So, don't you think that in the functioning of the NGOs, they only highlight the problem? They should also include the solutions की मान लीजिए जैसे आपने कोई बताया कि कोई प्रोजेक्ट है कि भाई इस प्रोजेक्ट को मत करो, इसके अलावा तुम ये कर लो ताकि लोकल पॉपुलेशन को भी दिक्कत ना हो और इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ.
अलग अलग तरीके के नहीं, you have raised a very valid concern, and most of the NGOs operate like that. They at this, so when they operate, they also tell you solutions. But remember that it's not like all NGOs are protesting. That's also the wrong understanding. I mean, most of the NGOs are not protesting. Most of the NGOs are helping the state to achieve the target set out in DPSPs. Or maybe in case of the state, the head should hang in shame that there are NGOs who are doing activism in the field of fundamental right, which means that the state has not been able to secure fundamental right. अगर कोई एनजीओ तुमको आर्टिकल 19 के राइट्स दिलाने की बात कर रहा है, इसका मतलब है ना कि आर्टिकल 19 भी नहीं मिला है. तो अल्टीमेटली व्हाट वाज एक्सपेक्टेड ऑफ द स्टेट इज बीइंग परफॉर्म्ड बाय समवन एल्स. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि हमेशा वो ऑपोजिशन में ही काम कर रहे हैं. ज्यादातर एनजीओज वही टारगेट अचीव करना चाह रहे हैं और उसकी स्टेट में हेल्प आई. अगर तुमने बच्चों को खाना खिला दिया तो स्टेट की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी कम हो गई ना, वहां पे एक बर्डन तो रिलीज हुआ है ना. नहीं, कोलैबोरेशन भी बेटर होता है. अरे यार देखो, अब वही है ना कि दिस कैन बी लाइक अ लॉन्ग डिस्कशन. जैसे देखो क्या होता है कि कोलैबोरेशन होता है. जैसे मान लो कि तुम अखबार में प्रथम की रिपोर्ट पढ़ते हो. प्रथम की रिपोर्ट से क्या होता है, पता चलता है कि किस स्टेट में एक्चुअल जो इफेक्टिव लिटरेसी है उसका क्या स्टेटस है. So for example, let's say in UP and Bihar, 70% of the kids going to class 5 are not able to solve the basic numeracy and language related question of class 3, standard 3. तो मतलब आप 5वीं में पहुंच चुके हो, लेकिन 5वीं में पढ़ने वाले 70% बच्चों को बेसिक एडिशन और सब्ट्रैक्शन नहीं आता है. अब मान लो ये रिपोर्ट तुमने एज अ मिनिस्टर या तुमने एज अ IAS पढ़ी, तो क्या तुम्हारी हेल्प नहीं हुई? तुम्हारी हेल्प हुई एज अ सेंट्रल, लेट्स से एज अ मिनिस्टर ऑफ एजुकेशन, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट का एजुकेशन मिनिस्टर हो तुम अगर, और तुम्हें दिख रहा है कि यार ये 5 स्टेट्स में बहुत ज्यादा खराब स्थिति है और उन जगहों पे उतनी मतलब 80% किड्स कैन डू बेसिक न्यूमरेसी. तो क्या तुम जब अगली बार फंड्स डिमांड बनाओगे अपनी मिनिस्ट्री की, तो तुम क्या एक्स्ट्रा फंड नहीं मांगोगे उस इन स्टेट्स के लिए? मांगना चाहिए तुम्हें. तो ये तो तुम्हारी हेल्प हुई ना कि तुम्हारी जो प्रायोरिटीज हैं वो कायदे से डायरेक्ट होंगी. अभी तक तो तुम्हारी मिस डायरेक्टेड प्रायोरिटी चल रही थी. तो हु मेड, विच ऑर्गन मेड और हेल्प द स्टेट टू मेक बेटर पॉलिसी? इट वाज एन एनजीओ. तो एनजीओ ने स्टेट का काम आसान किया ना. कौन करा सकता था ऐसा सर्वे हर साल? तो आपका एक इंडिपेंडेंट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन हो रहा है बाय सिविक सोसाइटी. सो अगर आपको जेन्युइनली एजुकेशन बढ़ानी है तो वो चीज हेल्पफुल है. अगर वो चीज आपको चुभ रही है तो मतलब आपका एम भी नहीं था कभी एजुकेशन देने का, है ना. Okay, so let's now talk about donors and charities. So obviously very short discussion. Why they should be discussed? Number one, because they are a part of the syllabus, so we have to be objective. And secondly, they are the ones which actually fuel other kind of civic action in the country or world. Without them, no civic action is possible. In fact, you can say that crowdsourcing is always available, but crowdsourcing in the absence of digitalization was very difficult. So now you can run an online campaign and ask for help. That has become easier. But imagine crowdsourcing in 1990s, 80s, 70s, 60s. So wherever and whenever the civic action has happened, it has always happened because of rich people. So I mean, going back to India's nationalist movement. India's nationalist movement was unique, and especially it became fierce after Gandhi, because Gandhi had this astuteness to see that अगर हम सिर्फ फार्मर्स के साथ गए या लेबर्स के साथ गए तो हमारा कुछ नहीं हो सकता, इसलिए टाटा बिरला को भी रखना है. So he carved out a strategy where the antagonistic interests of class interests could be taken care of somehow. So on the same platform you had labor union, employee and employer sitting together. So you had the labor union leader meeting Gandhi, and in the evening Birla and Tatas coming to meet Gandhi. You had zamindars coexisting on the same platform as the farmers, which is otherwise impossible because of their conflicts. So he realized कि ये मसल है और वो मनी है, दोनों चाहिए हमें. And similarly, what NGOs and pressure groups do is that they provide the muscle, but what fuels the action is money, because you need to be alive to carry out a civic action. So even if you decide to invest your whole life in civic action, you don't aspire for capital or money yourself, but at least you need to have a place to live, and at least you need to eat something, and then whatever action you want to fuel requires some kind of money, maybe publication of a magazine, or printing of pamphlet, or maybe putting up a board, or maybe hiring vehicles to take people to the protest site. So all of that requires money. So none of the civic action, if it has to be a sustained collective action, if it has to be sustained, it cannot be without a donor or a charity. मतलब अचानक से कोई इंसिडेंट हुआ और 200 लोग इकट्ठे हो गए, उसकी बात नहीं हो रही है, उससे कोई चेंज भी नहीं होता. चेंज तब होता है जब 10 साल तक लोग खड़े रहते हैं, और उन 10 साल तक लोगों को खड़ा रखने के लिए पैसा लगता है. एंड सो यू कैन सी दैट व्हाट इज एट द रूट और द बेस ऑफ एवरी काइंड ऑफ सिविक एक्शन is the donor or charities. Now, what is donor or charities? It's very simple, that people donate. Donations and charities are unique way of civic action, because without your direct participation, you can still achieve the intended social change. So either you can campaign yourself, or you can have the money and hire someone else to do or achieve what you wanted to achieve. So if a particular development process or industry is very close to you, is very close to your heart, you wanted to do something for the society, give back to the society as a genuine corporate social responsibility, but you never had the time or the freedom to do it, maybe, so you can delegate that responsibility to the people who are almost equally, if not less, compassionate about the same cause. You can identify those people, and then कि भाई मैं ये करना चाहता था, मैं नहीं कर पाया, तो भाई मैं तेरे को फंड कर रहा हूँ, तू कर इसको अच्छे से. So that is called so without direct participation, that is like a delegation. Wow. Delegation of civic action. So you delegate it to someone else. Generally, what has been observed in form of donation is that obviously you have to delegation, with devoid of direct participation, Palguna. Generally, the why donors and charities are respected so much is because while the social change that you want to achieve more often than not is tied, which means it has to be coherent, it has to align with your own social cause. So I am not going to donate for a cause that I do not agree with. Connect. So, but if I identify 10 civic society institutions, NGOs or pressure groups working for the same cause, after I fund them, then its disbursement is untied. And that is what adds beauty to, and that's what increases the respect for donors. First, donors decide to spend or donate only when they are convinced that this person is genuinely interested in the social change. And once they give the money, then they forget about it. Because obviously you have to be rich enough to not care about the philanthropy, and the amount of money that you donate for philanthropy should be such that you should not worry about once it's gone. That's the level you have to reach to. So you can see that generally what happens is why I'll make it clear as to why I'm generally saying is that what is tied or what is conditional is the social change. For example, mainly the cause. So cause cannot be compromised. So whatever cause that you want to serve they are very strict about it. So you cannot get money from a rich person to a cause that he or she does not agree to. But because you are at such a level that few millions of dollars do not worry you. It gives complete flexibility to the receiver to spend that money, and that's what makes them really powerful. Now, as we have seen as to how the philanthropy or the funding decides the civic action, now you can understand why. If most amount of money would go to global warming and climate change, you can understand how easily you will have NGOs working in climate change and global warming. If most amount of money would go to tribal rights, you would immediately see thousands of NGOs trying to prove how they have existed for 100 years just in tribal rights, try to gain more and more credibility to get funds. Is this clear to everyone? Yeah. So it basically, in the sense, it helps the civic society to sustain the action, fund the action in various ways, that it basically increases the firing range of each and every civic society action. So you can see why it is unique, is unlike any other that we have discussed or we will discuss. It is directly connected to all of them. So it is connected. So this is donors and charities are the only civic society activism which is connected to pressure groups, which is connected to NGOs, which is connected to SHGs, which is connected to all forms of civic society action. So every pressure group is being funded by a rich farmer. So when government decided to hurt the cause of the rich farmer, the farmers were on the street for like 2 years. कि मेरे डोनर के खिलाफ तूने कानून लाया, right? Because obviously the pressure groups were being funded by the same people who were at the forefront. So while in most cases you can see that the funds are tied, the cause is tied, whereas there is full flexibility in how it has to be disbursed. In some specific cases, the donors happen to be institutions themselves, and that's where you lose the flexibility. For example, World Bank, when it gives any kind of donation to the developing countries across the globe, not only the project or the area of investment of that fund is pre-decided, so in that sense the social change, for example, donation for renewable energy, World Bank grant to India for construction of rural roads, World Bank grant to India for creation or funding the micro small scale enterprises in our country to reduce poverty. So that is tied, but World Bank will not give you money if you do not follow financial prudence, if you do not bring good governance, citizen centricity, transparency, accountability, if you do not create institutions of grievance redressal and accountability, World Bank is not going to give you money. And that's when it creates a problem. It creates a problem because the donors and the charities, generally, when we see donors and charities, in our minds we are thinking about Ratan Tata, Azim Premji, Bill Gates, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We are thinking about these sorts of people. Obviously, that's true that the donations are done to the civic society action, but always remember that donations and the people who receive the donation is a cross-cutting connection, which means that the donors themselves can be state. American donation to Somalia for, let's say, opening up of schools. I deliberately did not use India. So state funding the state funding civic society, and then you would have civic society like Bill and Melinda Gates, CSO funding the state and CSO funding a CSO. Now, whenever it is state acting as a donor to another state, it compromises the sovereignty. I don't think it needs any explanation. If states fund a CSO like an NGO, it reduces the credibility of that NGO. If CSO like an international NGO or like an international donor funding a state, it has the ability to manipulate the ideology of the state or the priorities of the state. Democratically elected government can be manipulated because of donations. And when an international donor CSO funds a domestic CSO, we have seen what problems it might have. Now, the problem or the concerns that emerges because of this cross connection. Because it is money, it has to be problematic. Is this making sense to everyone? And that is why the donations are subject to the most extensive state regulation and checks. That is why there is no law that directly regulates civic society, but there is a law by the name of Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. It is mainly for donors. The problem is even deeper. The problem is that not only you can have cutting connections, we have not seen the connections between state and this CSO and that state and that, because that will make it complicated, but there can be connections here and there also. So you can see that the number one problem is that there is no way you can simplify the donor and the donee relations and what impact it will have on the social change that they want. Is this making sense to everyone? The second problem is, so number one problem is this, that it is very difficult to declutter. It is very difficult to exactly clearly see the conflict of interest. You will never be able to see the conflict of interest. As soon as you receive the foreign donations, the rest things cannot be truly understood. The problem is that when these people or the donors, they have donated the money for the social cause that they want to induce, very often the guarantees that were given to begin with are not followed through the commitments. So for instance, when let's say a person guaranteed, this is known as donor fatigue. 2 years donation, 3 years donation, 4 years donation, and then 5th year, the person will say, no, I do not want to donate any money. Especially in Indian context, this is very often the case. And why is that the case? Is because there is no way for the state to actually have the social impact assessment. It is very difficult for the state to go through the social impact assessment. There is for donors to exactly see. So initial investment was on the basis of name and fame and credibility. When you start investing the money, in your spare time, you would want to see the change for the cause that you donated. But problem is, in a vast, diverse, informal country like India, how will you prove? Or any person who received the money, it becomes increasingly difficult for that entity to prove this was the impact of your 2 crore rupees, sir. While other parameters of social change like physical infrastructure can be objectively demonstrated, empowerment is something that can't be. Or environmental change or degradation is something that takes a lot of time. So if the degradation of soil has already taken place because of 6 decades, 7 decades of unsustainable agricultural practices, it's very difficult to rejuvenate the soil in 5 to 10 years. अब आप डोनर की हैसियत पे आते हो 60 साल की उम्र में जब आप पैसा कमा लेते हो, तो आप निकलने से पहले देखना चाहते हो कि हाँ भाई हरियाणा की मिट्टी फिर से ब्राउन हो गई. अब वो एनजीओ जो आपसे पैसा लेके गया है, अब वो कैसे दिखा देगा यार व्हाइट से ब्राउन ट्रांजिशन? नहीं दिखा सकता ना, टाइम लगेगा. सो इससे क्या होता है कि डोनर इनिशियली तो बड़े एक्साइटेड होते हैं, एंड स्लोली एंड ग्रेजुअली द कमिटमेंट्स दैट दे हैड, द प्रॉमिसेस दैट दे हैव मेड, they start to withdraw and go back because of the lack of the impact, social impact. So that is why it is limited only to the social impact. It is very difficult to prove the impact on the society and to demonstrate the social change in like 10 to 20 years, which is the span where donors would stay as a donor. उसके बाद तो फिर उनके नाम पे ट्रस्ट चलेगा. सविता, Yeah, geolocation.
Yeah, those sort of things which do not necessarily translate into social impact. So that's also compromising sort of the efficiency of our NGOs.
Right.
Can we say that?
Of course, you can say that. We'll come to that. Any other doubt? Now, uh, when we talk about the NGOs in our country, the donors in our country, and as we were talking about yesterday, that if caste runs the society, caste will be reflected everywhere. If society is moved by religion, then everything will, the impact of religion will be imprinted everywhere. So instead of donors dominating the Indian civic society scene, it is dominated by charity. Charity on the basis of caste, charity on the basis of religion, reinforcing what the Constitution of India actually intends to fight or contest. So, as soon as you see Marwadi Sangh or Vipra Samaj Dharm Sabha, Rajput Dharmshala, it is reinforcing. While it is a civic society action, while it will provide the place for the caste, the people from the same caste to stay at a very reduced price in urban area, no one can deny that it is helpful. But if you look at the overall impact, social change, is it taking you forward or the intended direction that you want to go, or is it taking you backwards, reinforcing the caste identities? So in India, you have charities with an underlying task or aim to restore the caste system, restore Vedantic religion, Islamic religion, fundamentalist CSOs, and you have patriarchal CSOs. For example, with an aim to inculcate Indian values among women. So when you talk about and when you fund the cause, yeah, I don't know where I lost the voice. These are very strong CSOs, powerful ones. So what I was saying is that if you fund a civic society activism, obviously you can't really fund openly it with patriarchal mindset, but you will say a fund to inculcate the Indian values in women. And then you come out with literature and book to make women feel proud about their presence in kitchen and to make them feel bad about their participation in public life. That is not a progressive social change known as development, that is a regressive social change, which is definitely anti-constitutional, to say the least. So you can see that the Indian donor and charity scene faces the biggest problem is in its inability to think forward. So the NGOs that you say, Azim Premji Foundation, Tata Sons Foundation, and various other, these are the only few that you can name that act really as a donor for progressive society. Most of them act as charities which are on the path of regression because they themselves are based on the caste lines to reinforce the caste identities. They are on the basis of religion, operating in fundamentalist domain to make sure that at least the followers of the same religion, they are persuaded to follow the actual text, the fundamentals, on the basis of gender. I mean, then they can be segregated. So you can see the imprints of ethnicity and the power of ethnicity in civic society domain as well. And that is the problem because of which in India you don't have a very strong feminist movement, because the feminist movements are divided across caste line. So there is no unity So the feminist movement is not just divided along political ideology, liberal and radical feminism, it is also divided on caste line. So upper caste women, Brahmin women have their own feminist movement, and Dalit women, they are fighting their own battles. Is this clear to everyone? Obviously, then some people criticize it, to which I don't think that criticism is valid. But the problem is that the donors and the prominence that is given to donors undermines the civic participation, which means that you give so much of glamour and prominence to the people who fund this. Now, how many people know that the task of Bill and Melinda Gates is being fulfilled by NGOs in India? How many NGOs do we know? We know the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Every one of us know that. Now, because the glamour is located in the problem is that the people who are funding it have never participated in any civic action. So they have zero understanding and knowledge about how the civic society operates, or what is its procedure and what is its gestation period, whatever it is. So it immediately creates a mistrust or lack of trust between the donors and the people who are receiving the donation. It's like you fund a particular business in which you have no understanding or operation. तो आपको उसके निटिग्रिटीज नहीं पता होंगे, आपको नहीं पता होगा कि वो एरिया कैसे ऑपरेट करता है, उसमें कितने टाइम में पैसा वापस आता है, तो आप इंपेशेंट हो जाओगे. और स्पेशली अगर आपने लिकर इंडस्ट्री से पैसा कमाया है तो फिर तो आप हर जगह इंपेशेंट हो जाओगे. आपको लगेगा ये क्या, मतलब आज पैसा डाला कल वापस नहीं आता दुकान से पैसा, ऐसा है क्या, 4 साल वेट करना पड़ेगा. एंड सिमिलर इज द थिंग विद द सिविक सोसाइटी एक्शन. So you can see that slowly and gradually the people who donate and the people who are receiving the donations, that you can clearly see that slowly and gradually there is so you cannot, it's very rare to establish a long lasting relationship between the two important parts of the civic society operation, right? So these are the problems that they face in India right now. So I think let's start with the SHGs in the next class. We are running out of time. So we have to do SHGs and then we will start with governance, mainly the remaining 2 lines of the syllabus, which is what is governance, what is good governance. Shivanshu, kya hai governance? Just to see. सर अभी तो मैं पार्ट ही नहीं हूं, मैं कैसे बता दूं? मयूख बताएगा. What is governance? It is to govern.
How the executive operates.
Yeah, how the executive operates. Most as simple as that. The operation of the executive is government. So that is called governance. But you can see that the same task can be achieved in a good way and a bad way. So it does not communicate any value. To execute is both to execute badly and to execute in a good way. So if you have to do something, do it in a good way. So remember that dialogue from Lakshmi movie ki agar घास भी काटो तो अच्छे से काटो. So if we will govern, we will make an intent to follow every procedure of the governance in a good way. That is called good governance. So when you interact with people, you allow people to participate. So participation becomes an essence of good governance. When you will govern people, you will not hide any information. Transparent governance is a good governance, right? So these sorts of elements, which are also the part of GS4 syllabus, in subtly different ways, but the understanding remains the same. So all the keywords that we will discuss from Monday, Tuesday, and on Wednesday maybe, they are repeated in GS4 as it is, verbatim. So there is no difference between transparency, accountability, role of civil service here and there. The basic question, just the way you write the answer could change. Yeah, okay. So let's meet on Monday and try to finish the rest of the syllabus. Yeah. Yes, Kesang. Ke- ke- दानिश समझ में आया मतलब there is no problem in how what you are saying or how you are saying it, just the volume was you're largely inaudible and hence not comprehensible. Kesan, can you repeat the question or can you type it? There is some problem. Yeah, okay. Gauri, you are also not audible properly, Gauri. Yeah, better.
I also have a question regarding NGOs. Sir, is it possible to say that NGOs that can be regarded under public partnership, public-private partnership, it can have a negative or like detrimental to the states as a welfare provider?
Detrimental impact of partnering with NGOs. Yeah, I mean, we have talked about it. So, one direct negative consequence that you can think about where the NGOs partner with the state is that the state's capability to get things done gets down. So, that is an immediate impact that you can feel. So, state is whittled down because of partnering with NGOs, and it is so comforting that then the state gets into habit of partnering. कि हाँ तू ये भी कर ले, तू वो भी कर ले, तू वो भी कर ले. So धीरे धीरे the state, when we say that the role of the parliament and the legitimacy of the parliament or assemblies is declining, it's because of this. So the primary agents of representation, instead of being in parliament, it's now being done in the civic society, because when civic society will do everything, they will have higher credibility. So that is one direct consequence. Obviously, the second consequence is that when the civic society partners, instead of the political ideology that was elected by the people to rule the country, instead of that, the political ideology of the civic society will interact with the people and will interact. So, for example, if I tell you Akshay Patra is funded by SCON, how will you take it? Now you can see that instead of a secular state, a religious charity funded NGO is feeding people. Because the secular state did not either have the capacity or maybe was devoid of the intent. So, whatever is the reason, there was an NGO. An NGO is under no obligation of Article 25, 26, 27, 28, Article 14 and 15. So that is the second problem, that they are not bound by the kinds of regulation that the state is bound by. Savita.
So, in the way forward for NGOs, can we also suggest that there could be greater focus by the civil society and government policy on social entrepreneurship so that they can take care of their own finances in a way? And I feel like that can also be something that, while it can be argued that in certain areas you cannot have entrepreneurship, like you cannot make money like when you are working with children, but I feel like there are plenty of case studies from across the globe where even the most vulnerable communities are able to sort of through products or otherwise make money and then survive.
Yeah, so when we talk about social entrepreneurship, we keep the social entrepreneurship reserved for the self-help groups and cooperatives. We keep pressure groups, we keep NGOs, donors and charities outside the domain of social entrepreneurship. And so obviously one of the biggest advantage of self-help group is the ability of the SHGs to carve out the micro, small and medium enterprise by themselves. And there are enough case studies, as you suggest. I'm pretty sure all of them must be in form of the self-help groups.
So, but can we, like, as a suggestion, can we say that even like civil society organizations can sort of pivot into becoming social entrepreneurships while working on the causes that they're already working on?
See, I mean, I don't know what you refer to when you talk about social entrepreneurship, but if the intent is to earn profit, if it will be a profit driven. See, entrepreneurship, for me, if it is social entrepreneurship, it should be driven by social capital, not by financial capital, because that's what makes you a private limited company. So obviously, NGO and pressure groups and everyone is driven by gathering more and more social capital, that is in the form of social network, that is in the form of increased respect and dignity in the society. Everyone is ultimately, there is this underlying aim of human ego to boost in various ways. Some people boost their ego through money, some people do it through visibility, some people have this target that if I go to the area, more and more number of people will recognize me as a bhaiya or a didi who helped them. Okay? So that is, if this is what you indicate with social entrepreneurship, then obviously they are doing the same thing. But if you are indicating the monetization of the social capital into financial capital, that should never be allowed.
So, but why? Like, I'll give you an example. You tell me why that's a problem.
Yeah.
So, like, there's this Dutch organization which works with children, the school children who go door to door selling stamps.
Savita, do you work for them?
No, so I don't.
Have you worked for them?
So my mom runs an
Yeah.
NGO.
So see, this is what conflict of interest does. Yeah. Tell me. No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I totally understand what
Yeah.
you're saying, so I
Yeah.
understand that's socialization. But
Yeah.
like, so this Dutch organization, they have children who sell stamps, door to door, which is part of like their co-curricular activity, and they have been on for like 100 years, and even the Dutch king and queen have been part of this. And the money that they collect through selling those stamps are then funded into child rights organizations in underdeveloped and developing countries. So it's like children paying for children in other areas. So in that context, it's not necessarily driven by profit, but it's just that there's a way of
Yeah. So it's basically crowdsourcing. It is a way to gather funds. It's crowdsourcing. When I was thinking, when you refer to entrepreneurship, you refer to amassing of wealth, like generation of profits. It is crowdsourcing.
sort of.
See, and I am pretty sure that the money that the children collect is less important, but the families and lives that these children touch for a particular cause is used as a vehicle for consciousness. I don't think Dutch queen and king need 5 rupees from every Indian family. But what they want to do is for children to go and knock on the doors of their neighbors and say, we need 10 rupees, uncle. अंकल जी तो पूछेंगे क्यों चाहिए, तो बोले ये एक एनजीओ जो काम करते, तो इट इज फॉर द डिफ्यूजन ऑफ द अवेयरनेस. आई डोंट थिंक इट इज फॉर paltry sum of maybe 10 crore rupees throughout the country. That is a way to create awareness about a cause. Yeah. Kesang, did you write your question?
Yes, sir.
Where is it? Acha, the role of European Christian groups like missionaries into partaking social good by eradicating social evils, but at the same time imposing worldview. Yeah, that is what creates problem, right? Will this example fit into link with early analogs of NGO and how there are issues with even bringing the social good, but with hidden agendas or roles? Of course. I mean, I don't think the agendas are even hidden in most cases. They are very clear about their agendas. When they're clear that if we are opening up schools, we want children to follow a particular prayer. So that's not hidden agenda. That's a clear agenda. Now, even before you take admission into a convent school, you know that you will have to follow through some Christian principles. So if you, that is you, but no one has forced you to be a part of that school. So it's always the state which has to choose the priorities. This Indian state is like, वहाँ तो स्कूल वैसे भी नहीं बना पाएंगे तो ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं. Primary education is more important. Even with a Christian mindset, we don't care. So obviously you can, Kesang, one thing that you have to understand is that you can, if you worry about agenda, if you worry about ideology, then you will never be able to do anything in life. I mean, as a state, not as personally, you will not be able to do anything in life, because there is no one who can be absolutely apolitical, neutral, or non-partisan. It is impossible to have people. Everyone will be driven, and it is better if people are only driven by their political ideology and not driven by any other vested interest. Everyone have their own thought process, and obviously they will take their decisions according to that thought process. We should not be concerned by that, as long as it is not illegitimate political ideology or unconstitutional political ideology. Kisang, is this clear? Yeah. All right then. See you on Monday, guys. Bye bye.